Good afternoon, and welcome to 365 Days of Stories with Theo Mayer. Today is day 42, multiple of 7, which means that I'm telling stories from my own life, my life as a steward. And I left off from last week telling you about how Ron had pushed me over in the truck, started it off down the fence row, hopped out, hopped back in, and now I'm driving down the fence row, and my instructions are to stop at the end of the fence row. And they've been throwing, Ron and Dave, the man who owned the ranch, they're throwing fence posts out as I drive along every so many feet. And I get to the end, and again, it's a stick shift. Get to the end, and all I know to do is step on the brake. So I step on the brake, and the truck isn't really stopping. It wants to stop, but then it lunges forward again, and then it wants to stop, lunges forward again. It does this 3 or 4 times, and as it does, I'm pushing harder and harder on the brake because I'm wondering, is it going to stop? And finally, it comes to a stop, and with it, of course, the engine dies because I have not taken it out of gear. I had not pushed on the clutch to disengage the drive chain from the truck. Well, by the time I get it stopped, which my whole attention had been on pressing on that brake pedal, by the time I get it stopped, Dave and Ron are braced against the cab of the truck. Now, Dave's an old guy. He's in his 60s for sure. Ron's in his 30s, and Ron is laughing his head off. He uncontrollable laughter, and Dave is smiling and chuckling. And they just thought that was one of the funniest things ever, was that here's this kid that doesn't know how to drive a manual transmission and almost throws him out of the truck. So that was my first morning at the Garber Ranch. They proceeded to push me over into the middle. Dave got in one side, Ron got in behind the steering wheel, and we drove back up to the house. And they showed me, Ron showed me as we drove up to the house, how to actually drive a pickup truck. We loaded in some stuff into the truck, drove back out. Ron drove the tractor out. Dave drove the pickup out. The tractor had this device on the front. It was post driver, and it was a metal, U-shaped piece of metal with a unit that went up and down via hydraulics and drove these posts into the ground. And the wooden posts they were round, and they were like cone shaped, and they'd been treated, of course, at that point in time with creosote. And that was in, what was that? I think 1972, summer of 1972. Creosote was still something that you could use. It's what they treated railroad ties with, telephone poles, anything that was going to go into the ground or have ground contact and that you didn't want to rot. So we're, driving these fence posts in, and basically in the beginning, I'm just watching what's going on. They realize they've got, a true tin horn on their hands that doesn't know a daggone thing. And so pretty soon, once I got to see what was going on, I was holding the posts in place as they were beginning to get driven. Dave would make sure they were in the right place. Now, how did they create that straight fence line? Well, they had one post at one end, one post at the other end. We were driving posts in between. Now, this is, say, at least 100 yards, maybe more. And so they had a piece of wire fastened on this side to the back side of the post, at least compared to what we were working on, and then over here to this one. So all we needed to do was hold that new post that was getting driven up to the wire, and then it would get driven in, and you'd have this nice, beautifully straight fence row, which is what we did. Once that was in place, then you're stretching wire. And typically, Montana, cattle and sheep ranch, you're using barbed wire. And, so it's twisted wire that has these little prickly things in it so that livestock doesn't want to push up against it. And that is fastened in place along those wooden posts with a U-shaped staple. Kind of U-shaped staple that, went on either side of the barbed wire, and then you hammered it into place, typically with a pair of wire pliers. But these are kind of fencing pliers. And the fencing pliers look like it's like pliers with two handles. One end has one post to it that you can get under that staple if you have to push it out. And the other end has, a place that you can clamp a staple in order to pull it out. So anyway, the rest of that day we were driving those fence posts in. And the next day, probably we did the wire. It took us a little while. I will tell you that every day at noon, we stopped religiously for what was called, what wasn't called lunch. We had breakfast, dinner, and supper. So dinner was your midday meal. Supper definitely was your evening meal. And your biggest meal was dinner. And the food there was just absolutely amazing. Now, one thing I should make you aware of these were people that they grew and raised everything that they ate. Besides sugar and coffee, they went to town for sugar and coffee. They went to town with their grains to the mill in order to mill it into flours if they were going to use it, though most of the grains that they grew went to the livestock. They grew oats, barley, and wheat. So oats, barley, and wheat is what they grew. Horses, they got the oats. Barley, that went to the pigs. Wheat went to the horses, the pigs, and the people, as did the oats. They had bees on the property. They didn't keep the bees, but somebody else did, and gave them every year a fairly, like 5 gallons of honey, raw, beautiful alfalfa honey, every year. They had fruit trees and an orchard they picked from, and then those would get canned so that in the winter you had stuff to eat. They had a huge vegetable garden, which once again, they grew during the summer and then canned huge amounts of food in order to eat it during the winter months when nothing would grow. And of course, all right, Dave's wife was Mary. Ron's wife was Judy. Judy was the daughter of Dave and Mary. So Judy and Mary would work together to can all those things. They had chickens. One of the first jobs I had to do was clean out the chicken house, which was filled with chicken poop. And that was one of the nastiest jobs I've ever done. And the smell of, this accumulated mass of chicken poop was like pure ammonia. And what it did to the nasal passages was, not pleasant. And back then, people did not wear respirators or masks or anything. You were just in there shoveling that stuff into a wheelbarrow and then hauling it off to, I don't even remember where I hauled it off to. But huge amount of eggs were collected every day. Of course, that was very, that was like with every breakfast, we had eggs. We had eggs, bacon, some kind of potatoes, often some kind of meat that went with it. There was bread that Mary made. Mary and Judy both made bread. I'm sure that, it was the same recipe, same bread. I couldn't detect any difference between the two, but On bread day, when bread day was, happening, that was one of my favorite days because what came with bread day was sticky buns. Now, sticky buns were just like, off the charts. I've never eaten a cinnamon roll that comes close to the sticky buns that Judy and Mary made. They had plenty of butter, which was fresh from the milk cows. Milk cows, cream, churn the cream, turn it into butter. So you have this fresh butter that's like just lathered on top of these rolls. So what they do is spread out the bread dough, flat, and then they'd spread on this sugary, cinnamony raisins in it. Okay, they must have bought raisins at the store too. Raisins in there. They put that all on top of the flat bread that they'd rolled out, and then they'd roll it up into a roll that was about this big around. What is that? 2.5 inches around. And then they'd cut it into pieces that were about 2 inches high, and then stand it up in a tray. And of course, that would then expand. It would leaven. It rose, and those would get baked. Oh my God. Fresh sticky buns out of the oven. There was nothing like it. So that would happen. Now, I have to tell you that was the demise of my teeth. So here I am at 14 years old. I'm sleeping out in a bunkhouse. Dave had his place, let's say right here. He lived in a double that he had hauled in a prefabricated home, which was beautiful. You'd never know it. But it was 2 halves, of a house. So it was probably like 20 feet wide, and I don't know how many feet long. And anyway, so his house was here, and then Judy and Ron lived in the main house, the original ranch house. And so off of that is the bunkhouse is out here, further out toward the wilds and the equipment yard, and the shop was right built up, it was like out of my bedroom door was the shop. So I slept in the bunkhouse. 14 years old, no true parental oversight. Did I brush my teeth every night? Nah. Sometimes no. Sometimes yes. In the morning, never. So sometimes, I don't know how I just existed without brushing my teeth every day, but I did. And when I got home from Montana that first summer and went to the dentist, I had like, cavities because, sticky buns did not help the situation out. I can guarantee you that. One funny day in terms of food, it was dinner time and we were having this breaded liver. Now, to me, it looked like breaded something yummy. It was like breaded and then kind of fried in a pan. And I was like, oh my God, that looks just absolutely great. There were mashed potatoes. There were I think there were green beans, and we had some gravy, and we were working. So I was hungry. And I sit down, for the noontime meal. And, it was family style. So the plates of food were sitting there, and it was just usually Dave, me, and Mary that would eat. Ron would go to, his house. So we're eating there, and I just like take 2 or 3 pieces, big old pieces of this stuff, figuring this is gonna be great. And I take the first bite, and it was liver. I'd never had liver before. I was gagging. And, to be polite, I felt like I had to eat it all. So, every bite I was taking, it was just like swallow it, put some mashed potatoes and gravy with it, and hope for the best. I did survive that meal. I never wanted to touch that stuff again. And anyway, the adventures of living in Montana will continue next week. It was incredible. It's just incredible. It's something that I would wish upon everyone to have that experience, because it put you so in tune with where your food is coming from, the beautiful earth we live on, the wilds, everything. See you next week for this episode, and tomorrow, hopefully, for more tales from the Alhambra.